Willa braced one hand against her hip, the other lifting a plank of wood that was almost too heavy for the way her body now curved forward. Her belly pushed hard against the worn fabric of her coat, round, undeniable. The baby kicked each time she bent low, as if it too was protesting the cold and the quiet. She gripped the hammer tighter. Each swing felt like it drove straight through her spine. Blood gathered beneath one fingernail where the wood had splintered, but she didn't stop. The wall wasn't done. The roof still leaked. The child inside her grew bigger with every dawn, and no one else was coming to build this place but her. Each nail was a kind of declaration. She'd been turned away too many times, by parents who couldn't forgive, by a man who couldn't stay, by the silent stares that didn't need to speak to make her feel like less. And now this clearing in the thinning woods of late autumn Colorado, with its shrieking wind and sky thick with snow, was all she had left. A rented patch of land, a half-finished cabin, a life forming under her ribs, and a will no one had believed in, not even long enough to ruin. She didn't cry, didn't call out to God. She just kept driving nails, like she was sealing shut every crack no one had bothered to mend. Until the sound of hooves broke the silence at the edge of the trees. Colorado Territory, late October, 1882. The wind here was unlike any she'd ever known. It didn't howl or shriek. It slipped through the sparse pines like a question, brushing her skin with a chill that lingered only long enough to be felt, then fled. The sky hung heavy, the color of damp ash, not the promise of rain, but the pale silver gray of late autumn, when the sun neither fully rose nor fully set, caught in an eternal hesitation. Willa Thorne stood in the clearing, axe in hand, facing the half-built wall of the cabin she was raising alone. Each nail driven into the wood rang out like defiance, sharp, solitary, echoing through a wilderness that bore no witness. Every strike was an answer to the voices she'd left behind. The curt interruptions, the whispers behind lace curtains in church, the headshakes from kin and strangers alike. She was building her life from rough pine and spruce, logs too crooked for anyone else's use, much like herself. Her belly swelled beneath the coarse wool of her dress, aching her back and making each breath a measured thing. She didn't complain. When dizziness came, she sat, then rose, kept on. No one but these woods knew her name. She meant to keep it that way, until the sound of hoofbeats stopped her. Not a frantic gallop, but a steady, deliberate rhythm, purposeful, unhurried, as if the rider had crossed this land 100 times and found nothing strange in it. She turned, her grip tightening on the axe handle. A man emerged from the tree line. Tall, lean, his gray-brown duster coated in a fine haze of red grit. His horse, a bay flecked with white, stood steady on the frost-dusted leaves. His eyes settled on her. Not long, but long enough to see. Then he spoke, his voice low and clear, like a man more used to talking to the earth than to people. Thought this cabin was abandoned last year. Willa didn't answer. She straightened, one hand resting on the curve of her belly beneath the dark cloth. But then I heard the hammer, he went on, his tone softening, as if speaking to the wood itself. Guess I was wrong, she replied slowly, her eyes steady on his. It's not finished, but I'm not gone. A beat of silence. He nodded, his gaze sweeping over the half-raised logs, the axe propped against a stump, and her hands, reddened, slightly swollen. Alone? No one else out here. Not many choose to build in the middle of nowhere, especially not with a child on the way. She didn't flinch. didn't react, just said, slow and sure, "I didn't choose the circumstance, but I chose to keep going." He was quiet for a moment. "Name's Jonah Callaway. My ranch is north of here. If you see a straight fence running past the creek, that's mine." Willa didn't offer her name. She wasn't used to conversations that felt long enough to matter. Instead, she asked, "You hear about the land?" He shook his head, light as a breeze skimming the river. "Just riding the boundary. This plot belonged to old Winslow. Didn't know he'd sold it. Bought it in June, got papers, stamped and proper." "I don't doubt it." For the first time, she couldn't tell if his look was understanding or just plain indifference. He leaned forward, tightening the reins slightly. "You got enough dry firewood?" She hesitated, not because of the question, but the way it landed. No pity, no strings. "Enough for today." He nodded, as if taking her word as truth, whether it was or not. "I'll leave a bundle at the edge of the clearing. No need to thank me." Willa spoke, measured, but with something new, not softer, but truer. "I don't need pity, Mr. Callaway." He tilted his head, his eyes meeting hers again, direct, unflinching. "Didn't bring any." Then he turned his horse. She watched him go. The wind stirred, carrying bits of brittle leaves in the wake of his horse's hooves, light as a long exhale. That night, she found the firewood, neatly stacked by the old spruce, dry, quick to catch, bound with clean hemp rope. No note, no sign, just the quiet presence of a man who'd lost more than he let on. She set the bundle by the cooling embers and sat, hands cradling her belly. The firelight flickered, casting shadows like unspoken vows. Somewhere in the stillness of the night forest, she felt a crack form in the stone wall around her heart. Not enough to break it, but enough to let something through. Outside, the wind shifted. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the earth was starting to hold the cold longer. She lifted the axe again and drove another nail. Colorado Territory, late October, 1882. 3 days had passed since their first meeting. The wind had shifted. The air grew colder, sharp enough to glaze the unrusted nails with a thin sheen of frost. Willa scattered ash around the cabin's foundation to keep wild things at bay, then went back to her work. Nothing had changed. Nothing should change. But that morning, as the dull ache in her back lingered and her fingers stiffened in the chill, she saw a horse's silhouette at the edge of the clearing. It was him again. Jonah Callaway. Same worn duster, thick wool gloves, and that steady gaze that didn't press. Today, though, he carried a checkered cloth bundle, tied tight and cradled in the crook of his saddle, as if it were the most precious thing he owned. Willa stood on the unfinished porch, one hand braced against her aching hip, the other gripping the axe. She said nothing. He dismounted, nodded in place of a greeting, and walked to a broad log near the woodpile. He set the bundle down, careful not to step closer. "My mother sent some tea," he said, his voice even, like he was remarking on the weather. "Ginger and mint. Says it settles the stomach and warms the hands." Willa didn't move. "And she knitted a few things. Don't know if you'll have use for them." "I don't need them." Her reply came quick, cold. A reflex honed through winters of being overlooked. "I'm not used to taking from strangers." Jonah nodded. No argument. "Fair enough." He stood there, still as a tree, and just as unyielding. Just thought. Building a whole house alone in the woods isn't common. Less so with a storm brewing. She narrowed her eyes. "You think I'm doing something foolish?" "I think." He paused, his gaze flicking to her hands. If anyone could do it, it'd be you. His words caught her off guard. Not flattery, not encouragement. Just a statement, plain as the earth, like he believed it without needing proof. "I'm not weak," she said, her voice lower now, softer but guarded. "I know how to stand my ground." "Never thought you were." He said it like there was no other possibility, like nothing more needed saying, and he didn't say more. Just turned, tightened the reins, and mounted his horse. "I won't bother you again," he said, then rode off. No waiting for a reply, no trace of someone expecting gratitude. Willa stood still for a long while. The wind slipped through the unthatched roof, carrying the soft clatter of rope against bark. She stepped toward the bundle, meaning to toss it aside. Instead, she sat and untied it, her numb fingers brushing the soft folds of cloth. Inside was a small sack of dried tea, its scent a faint mingle of mint and ginger, sharp and soothing, and 3 knitted pieces: a pair of tiny socks, a pale gold cap, and a thin shawl, woven from thick but gentle wool. She touched them, her hands trembling, not from cold, but from holding something that didn't belong to her. Something softer, kinder than anything she'd allowed herself to accept. Her hand settled on her belly. The child kicked, light but sure, as if in agreement. That night, she boiled water, not for the tea but for her dry throat. Yet when the scent of mint filled the cramped cabin, something in her broke. Tears fell before she could stop them, trailing down her cheeks. For the first time in months, she wept. Outside, the wind grew stronger, leaves tapping the window like a faint knock. She wiped her face, settled back into the corner of the cabin, a blanket draped over her belly. The gold shawl lay curled in her palm, small as an unopened bud. The fire crackled, the tea cooled, but the warmth lingered. And for someone long accustomed to cold, that was a greater shift than she'd ever expected. Colorado Territory. Early November 1882. Snow came early that year, not with a gentle drift, but as a heavy white blanket smothering the forest in a single night. Young branches snapped under the weight, cracking like dry bones. Willa woke to cold, seeping through the cabin's gaps, though the embers in the hearth still glowed faintly. She wrapped the gold shawl tight around her neck and pushed open the door. Frost clung to the earth, unmarked by any human tread. The forest stood silent, as if holding a warning in its stillness. She stacked more firewood on the porch, each log falling with a rhythm like time itself. The cabin's roof still gaped with bare beams, letting the wind whistle through. She hefted the axe, splitting a dry spruce branch, her breath clouding in the sharp air. Each swing was an answer to what she'd left behind. The cutting voices, the head shakes behind church lace. She didn't know where the rumors started. Maybe from the prying eyes in Willowbrook, where she traded eggs for flour, or from the Kowalskis' half-spoken remarks, now eyeing her like a puzzle they didn't care to solve, or from Jonah Callaway himself, who didn't hide her name when he spoke of her in town. No explanations, no defenses. That plainness, somehow, set tongues wagging. Rumors didn't need proof, just a current to carry them far. That morning, her belly heavier, Willa tied a scarf over her hair, tucked a few eggs into a wicker basket, and took the muddy path to Willowbrook. The earth sank under her boots, dark sludge clinging to her skirt's hem. The town appeared after a bend, a cluster of wood-shingled roofs, a rowdy saloon, and Hattie Weaver's general store, lonesome beside a flickering oil lamp. She pushed open the store's door, the brass bell jangling. The air smelled of flour, molasses, and kerosene. Mrs. Weaver, hair pinned tight, stood behind the counter, her eyes sliding from Willa's belly to her mud-caked boots. Two other women, one in an apron, one clutching a basket, stopped talking, their gazes sharp as needles. "Morning, Mrs. Weaver," Willa said evenly, setting the basket of eggs on the counter. "6 eggs for flour." Mrs. Weaver nodded, but slowly. "Eggs are smaller than last week," she said, turning each one as if inspecting counterfeit coins. "Weather making your hens lazy, is it?" "Could be," Willa replied, avoiding the other women's eyes, though she felt them prickling her back. "Or you're busy with other things," Mrs. Weaver added, her voice honeyed but edged. One of the women stifled a laugh, hiding it behind a gloved hand. "Heard Jonah Callaway's been by your cabin plenty. Town's starting to notice." Willa's grip tightened on the basket's handle, but she didn't look down. "I don't invite anyone," she said, locking eyes with Mrs. Weaver. "And I don't care what people say." Mrs. Weaver raised a brow, sliding a sack of flour across the counter. "Girl, rumors are like smoke. Don't need a fire to burn." She tilted her head, as if sharing a secret. "You alone, with a belly like that, and a man coming by. Folks'll paint the story they want." Willa took the sack, saying nothing. The bell clanged as she stepped out, carrying the cold and the weight of eyes on her back. Willowbrook's streets felt longer, each step sinking through an invisible mire. That afternoon, a strange sound broke the rhythm of Willa's hammer. Not hoofbeats, not falling wood, but the iron clatter of wheels on crusted snow, bold as a proclamation. She stopped, brushing a small storm of flakes from her shoulder. A black lacquered carriage rolled into view, gleaming and out of place, like a beast strayed from its herd. The horse's hooves glinted with silver shoes. The door opened. A woman stepped down, commanding the space without a glance. Her long coat grazed her heels, lambskin gloves gleamed white, and starched lace framed her throat. Her face, lightly powdered, was drawn with the precision of a ruler. "Miss Thorne, I trust you know who I am," she said, her voice smooth as silk. Willa stood still, hands in her coat pockets. "Lydia Carrington," she replied, neither nodding nor bowing. Lydia's lips curved, not kindly. "Then today's a good day for introductions." Her eyes swept over the bare-roofed cabin, the neat woodpile, the mud-darkened boots by the door. "I'm not here out of curiosity. I'm here because rumors spread like dry grass in Willowbrook." Willa stayed silent, her belly stirring faintly. "You live alone with child, and Jonah, my betrothed, visits you more often than the preacher visits the chapel," Lydia said, her tone polite but sharp as flint. "I believe you don't call him, but you don't stop him, do you?" "I don't ask him to stay," Willa said, her voice low, cracking just once. "But you take," Lydia countered, stepping half a pace closer, her skirt untouched by the frost. "You take his firewood, his tea, his presence, and your presence is enough to turn the town against Jonah, enough to make his father stop speaking of our wedding, enough for me to stand here, in this snow, telling a stranger, 'Please disappear.'" Willa's hands clenched in her pockets. The cold seeped through her soles, but Lydia's voice was colder. "Sell this land. Leave. Jonah's a good man, but good men don't survive the weight of gossip." A long silence stretched. Willa didn't cry, didn't argue. She only said softly, "I built this house myself. Cut the wood. Hauled the stone. No one brought me here. If I leave, I'll walk away on my own." Lydia studied her, not with malice, but like someone used to winning who wasn't sure this time. The carriage rolled away, leaving deep wheel tracks in the snow. That night, Willa sat by the hearth, the fire dwindling. The gold shawl lay on the table beside a cold cup of tea. She didn't weep, but her chest felt heavy, as if layered with fresh snow. For the first time, she wondered, was her presence harming the one person who'd looked at her with respect, not pity? She lifted the hammer, driving a nail into a beam, the sound stark in the night. Not to finish the cabin, but to remind herself. She was still here, and she hadn't given up. Colorado Territory, first snowstorm, 1882. The storm didn't come with thunder. It arrived in a velvet silence, then swallowed the world's colors whole. A gray afternoon dragged down by sodden ash clouds, pressing close to the earth. The wind didn't howl. It whispered, steady and relentless, as if carving incantations into the unfinished wooden roof. Willa Thorne knew snow was coming from the air's scent, clean yet ancient, like raw iron and damp cloth. She stacked more wood in the hearth, sealed the gaps with wet rags, scattered ash around the door, prepared as if preparation could keep the storm outside. But the real storm began within. The first contraction wasn't fierce, just a dull cinch around her lower back, throbbing, twisting, enough to make her brace a hand on the table and hold her breath. The second came sooner, stronger. The third doubled her over, clutching the chair's edge, cold sweat beading at her nape. Willa had prepared for this. Under the bed, a canvas sack held clean cloths, hemp thread, boiled water, iron shears, and a folded scrap for a makeshift cradle. But nothing in that bundle stopped her hands from trembling like leaves. No one was here. Just her, the wind-sliced walls, and the child in her womb demanding life in a season when most creatures burrowed deep. She folded a cloth, neat and tight, then sat, waiting, not praying, not calling any name, just breathing in, breathing out, as if each breath were a step across a chasm. Across the valley, Jonah Callaway looked up at the sky. It was only dimming then, snow falling lightly, but his horse, Flint, the white-flecked bay, tossed its head, refusing to stand still. Jonah knew the signs. Wind shifting, no birdsong. Air heavy, like an ache in old bones before rain. And something else, a nameless tug in his chest, an instinct he'd never labeled but never doubted. He didn't change his coat. Just grabbed a storm lantern, tied it to the saddle, took the medical kit, and rode into the forest before anyone could ask where he was going. The wind screamed as the sun died. No more hammer strikes, no saw's rasp, only ragged breaths and pain crushing like hands squeezing her ribs. Willa lay curled on the floorboards amid cloths and ash. She'd cut the cord, hands shaking, blood streaking her sleeves. The child, wrapped in the shawl Jonah's mother had sent, didn't wail, only whimpered like a snapped twig. Willa breathed as if each gasp were a wrestle. She wanted to say something, to the child, to herself. But her mouth was dry, raw as drought-cracked stone. Lydia's voice echoed in her mind. Disappear. Let go. Don't hold a good man back, she thought. Who have I held back? Even this child she'd nearly lost. Her vision blurred. Each heartbeat sank under snow in her lungs. She touched the child's chest, felt it pulse, faint but real. Then she closed her eyes, as if the world were slipping from her grasp. And then, a heavy thud against the door. Once, twice. The door burst open, wind roaring in like a beast, and with it a swaying figure, snow-crusted, cloak stained dark with blood at the left shoulder. Jonah. He staggered inside, collapsing by the hearth. No words, no shout of her name. His eyes scanned the room, catching the tiny bundle by her skirt, then moving to her, as if each step were a battle. Blood seeped from his coat, smearing the floorboards, but his eyes burned, still held fire. He sank beside her, knees brushing the cloth's edge. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from fear he'd come too late. Willa's eyes opened. Part of her didn't trust the sight before her. "You," Jonah didn't answer at once, just touched her cheek lightly, warm, as if he hadn't crossed a blizzard. Then he looked at the child. It stirred, frail, and whimpered. Jonah leaned close, lips barely moving, but his voice cut through the wind's wail and her broken breaths. "Looks like you've already built a family, Miss Thorne." A pause. Willa smiled, not with her lips, but with something deep, something she'd thought dead. She looked at him then, truly looked. His coat was soaked, heavy with snow, but the cold wasn't what alarmed her. Blood, dark red, spread across his left shoulder, seeping through 2 layers of cloth. She gasped. "Your arm. It's bleeding. Are you all right?" Her voice was soft, but for the first time in months, it carried something beyond caution. Concern. Jonah gave a faint smile, not joyful, but real. Snow turned to ice. Flint slipped. I fell into the creek. He glanced at her, then the child. "Lucky my head didn't hit first." Willa frowned, tore a strip of spare cloth, touching the wet patch gently. "How deep?" "Just tore the coat. Bones are fine. Don't worry." She fell silent, asked no more, just shifted, letting him sit closer. The hearth's glow strengthened. She placed the child in his arms, one hand still steadying. And for the first time since entering this cabin, she let another touch what she'd fought to protect. A small gesture, like a nod, like an exhale. But enough for a man who'd lived with horses and earth to understand. He was allowed to stay. He shed his coat, draping it over mother and child, then sat there amid ash and the storm's howl outside, eyes half closed, one shoulder bleeding, but his hand holding hers like a man keeping a rope from snapping. Outside, snow fell as if the sky were emptying itself. Inside, 3 breaths wove together, slow and fragile, but enough to endure. For the first time, Willa didn't push away the hand beside her. No promises were made, no explanations given. But in the half-roofed cabin, amid a whitewashed night and broken bones, something began. Not with a call, but with someone who came and didn't leave. Colorado Territory, early December 1882. They made no agreement. No name was given to what lay between them. No boundaries were drawn, but none were crossed without a silent nod. Jonah Callaway didn't ask to stay. Willa Thorne didn't tell him to leave, and so the small cabin on the forest's edge, once meant for just a woman and her child, now held the sound of a man's steps, the steady knock of a hammer, and silences no longer sharp with cold. Snow lay thick on the roof, but inside, the new kitchen had a wind-blocking door. Jonah split wood at dawn, patched the leaking roof when the sky cleared, built a drying rack, and fixed hinges that didn't creak. He didn't ask what was needed. He looked and knew. Willa saw him step out each morning, his coat damp with snow, gloves sticky with pine sap. When he returned, he left his boots outside. Never entered until his hem was wiped dry. Some people live a lifetime under one roof and never think to keep their dirt from another's space. Jonah didn't need reminding, and for that, he was allowed to stay. Elijah, the name she gave the child, slept soundly in the wooden cradle Jonah had crafted. He didn't cry much, just stared at the cabin's roof, his dark brown eyes tracking the light slipping through uncaulked gaps. Jonah once said, "Boy looks like he knows more than he should." Willa smiled. Maybe he's keeping watch on two grown folks circling each other like owls. They didn't talk of the future, only of needing another window nailed shut, or how to dry roots to last the winter. And then, one afternoon, Willa spoke unprompted. "I had a family once." Jonah didn't look up from the log he was chiseling. She went on. "My father was a preacher. My mother, the kind who never shed a tear, except in church." He paused, waited. "I did what they called a sin, loved the wrong man, trusted the wrong words. When they found out, they cast me out like something filthy." Silence. She stared into the glowing coals. "That man, the child's father, said one thing when I told him I was pregnant. 'Can't be mine.' Then he left. Didn't look back. A long breath. Not a complaint. Just the sound of wind leaving a wound. I didn't cry then. Just remember standing outside their door, hearing my mother call out, 'This house doesn't welcome girls like you.'" Jonah didn't interrupt, offered no hollow apologies. He set the chisel down, looked at her. No tears, no pity. Just the gaze of someone who knew what it was to be pushed from a world that was once theirs. "Sarah stood outside my door too," he said. His voice was low, even, almost like he was telling someone else's story. "On our wedding day, she laughed, eyes bright. Told me, 'Don't race me to the ridge, I'll win.'" A pause. "I lost. But at the top, she turned back. And her horse spooked. Slipped. She fell, head hitting stone." He exhaled slowly. "I got to her, but she was gone, eyes still open, like she was looking past me." Willa said nothing, just sat closer, near enough, but not touching, not pulling away. The fire crackled. Elijah stirred, and in the cramped cabin the wind outside seemed to pause for a moment. That evening, they ate oatmeal cooked with a pinch of brown sugar. Jonah took the scorched bits from the pot's bottom for himself. No explanation, no need for praise. Willa watched him as he washed the dishes. Not quite affection, just recognition of something rare. A man who didn't try to step in, didn't try to take over, just stayed when he wasn't sent away. She didn't need declarations of love. She needed breakfast without complaints. A hand that didn't touch her things uninvited. Someone who could hear her past without turning it into something to fix. Jonah did all that, without ever claiming it. Maybe that was the only reason she let him stay. Maybe too, though she didn't say it, the reason she no longer wanted him to leave. That night, as snow began to fall again, Willa rose to tuck another blanket around Elijah. Jonah was asleep, back against the wall, coat draped over his legs, an old Bible open on his knee. She looked at him a long while, then turned away. Sometimes, the only thing a person needs in life isn't someone who brings light, but someone who comes and doesn't leave, even when the fire they kindle isn't theirs alone. Colorado Territory, late winter, 1882. The snow was melting, not swiftly, not all at once, just patches breaking free from the slopes, sliding down like silent confessions. Inside the cabin, Willa brushed Elijah's hair with her fingers. The boy was no longer the red-wrinkled newborn. His eyes were taking shape, following the light, as if realizing this world was real. Jonah worked outside, hammering at the kitchen door's hinge. No one spoke of the future, but it took form in small acts. A new curtain, a cradle hook on the ceiling, a third nail driven into the bed frame. Not because it was loose, but for certainty's sake. One morning, as the wind shifted, Jonah said, "I want to take you home." Willa looked at him. "I'm already home." He shook his head lightly. "The Callaway Ranch, to meet my folks." She tightened her grip on her sleeve, saying nothing. "Not for propriety," he went on. "Just, they should know why I don't eat supper alone anymore." Willa smiled, a breath of a smile, but real. "And if they don't like me?" Jonah shrugged. "They'll have to get used to it. I'm not asking permission." The Callaway Ranch sat at the western edge where sparse pines gave way to rolling hills, gold-brown grass peeking through melting snow. The house was sturdy wood, low-roofed, with a chimney stretching like a throat, breathing steady after a long dream. Jonah carried Elijah in first, as if the boy were a neutral emissary. His father, Mr. Callaway, opened the door, standing like an ancient oak that never budged. His mother, hair silver as spun thread, eyes kind but not soft, touched Elijah's cheek without a question. Willa stood there, not introducing herself, but not bowing her head. Jonah's voice was steady, his hand resting on her back. "This is the woman I've chosen to live with, not by obligation, but by choice." His father didn't reply, just looked at Willa, long and steady, then gave a slight nod, as if acknowledging that this choice came not from pity, but from courage on both sides. 2 days later, Jonah lit a lantern on the porch. He told no one. But by dusk, neighbors arrived. The Kowalskis brought brown bread. The storekeeper's wife carried sugar wrapped in wax paper. The mailboy stood quietly at the porch's edge, clutching a bundle of dried flowers. No one wore new clothes. No one brought wedding gifts, because no one was invited to a wedding. Just a meal among people who knew cold, hunger, and silence, and knew warmth didn't come from ceremony, but from staying. Jonah stood, hand in Willa's. No vows, no rings. He only said, "We're not marrying. We're choosing each other." Willa looked at him. The lantern's gold light caught his cheekbones like the glow of a fire, unlit by any one hand, but needed by all. Mrs. Callaway ladled soup into bowls, said nothing, but served Willa first, then Jonah. And that was enough. Willa knew. She was seen. The next morning, Willa stepped onto the porch to find Jonah removing the old door handle, warped by years, creaking with each close. He didn't say what he was doing, just took a broken horseshoe, discarded by most, soaked it, smoothed it, polished it, and bent it into a sleek arc. When he fitted it to the door, he said only, "I thought it was ruined. Turns out it just needed reshaping." Willa touched it, firm, fitting perfectly. He looked at her. "Like you. Thought to be scrap. Turns out you can hold up a whole door." She didn't answer, just gripped the handle as if learning for the first time her hand could hold something, not to protect, but to trust. That night they sat by the hearth. Elijah slept deeply, lips parted, hands curled as if clutching a dream. Willa sat near Jonah, not close but not as distant as before. He held out his hand, not demanding, not beckoning. She took it, not with her fingers, but with the feeling that if she was someone new today, it was because this man stayed when she was worth no one staying. Colorado Territory, late March, 1883. Winter didn't retreat with a storm. It left by dissolving, slivers of ice slipping from slopes, drops falling from the eaves, patches of earth emerging underfoot, like a promise no one dared speak aloud. Willa heard spring before she saw it, In the rustle of wind through the willows, in the slower tap of Jonah's hammer on a broken fence, in the damp, musky scent rising from the forest floor, freed from its frozen cage. The cabin was still unfinished. Gaps needed caulking, a porch step needed replacing, but that no longer stole her breath. Those flaws were like scars now, not beautiful, but proof of healing. In the whisper of wind through willows, in the softer tap of Jonah's hammer on the western fence, in the musky scent of damp soil stretching after months of silence. It was in Elijah's giggle that morning, his first real laugh, as light slipped through the cabin's half-patched roof and landed warm on his cheek. She'd been hanging diapers out to dry when she heard it. The sound stopped her mid-clothespin. Not a cry, not a coo, but a laugh. Instinctive, sudden, full, like something that had been buried deep inside him from the womb, waiting for just the right breeze to release it. Willa turned and saw him in the cradle Jonah had built, eyes wide, lips parted in wonder, like he was laughing at the wind itself, as if something invisible had spoken to him in a language only the very new could understand. She stilled. A breath caught in her throat. That sound, light and round, seemed to push the walls of the cabin outward, filling the air between the floorboards and rafters with something close to grace. Outside, Jonah was bent over the eastern gate, fitting a hinge. He didn't hear the laugh, but she looked at him and knew. He had built the kind of stillness in which such a sound could bloom. At noon, while Jonah rode to check the southern fence, Willa sat at the table and pulled out an old blue sheet of paper. The letter had no address, no clear recipient, just something that needed writing, not to be sent, but to close a door. Father, I used to think I needed forgiveness, that if you opened the door, I wouldn't have to brace myself so hard. But it turns out, I didn't. I didn't need acceptance. I just needed to be seen, as I am, with all I've done wrong and all I've chosen right. You're not here to see this, but I'm not writing this for you. I'm writing for me, to know I'm no longer waiting, no longer trying to become someone worthy. I'm living a small life, no miracles. But there's a fire in the hearth, my son's cries and laughter, a man who didn't leave when I was at my weakest, and that's enough. Willa. She folded the letter and placed it in her father's old tin box, the one he'd used for sermons. She set a smooth stone atop it, not to hold it down, but to keep the wind from carrying it away. That afternoon, Elijah tried to stand. It started with him clinging to the leg of the table, wobbling, breath puffing out in little huffs like a horse new to the saddle. His fingers gripped the wood like it might vanish. Willa knelt beside him, steadying his side, but it wasn't until Jonah stepped in that the moment anchored. He crouched, boots dusty from work, and held out both hands. "No rush, little man," he murmured. "We've got time." Elijah blinked at him, then took a step. Wobbly, crooked, half-fall, but a step, and then another. Jonah didn't cheer, didn't cry out in joy. He just breathed in deeply, as if storing the moment inside his ribs. His hands caught Elijah's arms when the boy nearly toppled, then loosened again, letting him try. Willa stood back, one hand over her heart. Not pressing, just resting. There was no applause, no grand moment, just creaking floorboards, soft grunts from Elijah's efforts, and Jonah's voice, quiet, steady, as he whispered, "That's it. You've got it." When Elijah finally collapsed into his arms, giggling and red-faced, Jonah looked up. His eyes met Willa's. Neither of them spoke. But in the dust-lit hush of the cabin, something unspoken settled between them, solid as timber. That night, Elijah wouldn't sleep. He fussed, twisting in the cradle, reaching for arms, for heat, for something that made the darkness softer. Willa tried first, rocked him slow, hummed low, but nothing held. Then Jonah reached out, just a gesture, not a command, and took Elijah in his arms. The child nestled into his chest like he'd done it every night, his fists unclenched, his body slackened, and within minutes, his breath came slow and even, little nose pressed to Jonah's collarbone. Willa sat across from them. She didn't speak, didn't even move. The fire was low, the shadows long. But something about that sight, her son asleep on this man who had never once asked what he'd get in return, moved through her like spring water finding its path through thawing stone. She didn't cry, but she let herself feel it. Every fracture mending, every thread reweaving, every what if that used to sting turning into what now. Jonah didn't look up. He just adjusted his hold, one broad hand over Elijah's back, the other resting on his knee, fingers brushing the child's sock. There was no music, no wedding rings, no vows whispered in the dark. But in that moment, under the roof they'd built together, plank by plank, nail by nail, Willa knew. They had made something lasting, something that didn't need names to be real, something that might, at last, be called a home. If you believe love needs no promises, only someone who stays, follow Wild West Love Echoes to hear more stories that soothe the heart. One red dirt road, one steadfast glance at a time.